All right, let's talk acrylic paint supplies. The first thing you're gonna need is paint. Acrylic paint comes in tubes like this. I like golden, but this is a very expensive brand, so you're gonna be using more student grade, and that's totally fine. These will work. The most important colors will be your primary colors, so red, blue, and yellow. If you have the ability to get a few different colors, it's really helpful, especially with acrylic paint. I love using multiple kinds of blue, a warm and a cool blue. I appreciate a few different kinds of yellows. I even like to have a green and an orange and a purple that are already mixed up for me. But to get started, the most basic colors you need are the primary colors, and then definitely white, and then maybe black. Black you don't always need to use with paint. In fact, you can usually mix up your own black, but if you want to have black, you absolutely can. So those are the most basics. The next thing you're going to need are brushes. Paint brushes come in all different shapes and sizes. I almost exclusively use what are called flats and brights. Flats and brights are straight across the top. They come out kind of like a square from the ferrule, which is the metal part of the paintbrush, and then they're chopped off at the top. But I appreciate these, and I'll show you more about how to use different kinds of brushes. The next thing you're going to need is something to mix your paint on. You don't necessarily need a particular kind of palette. My actual favorite thing to mix paint on is wax paper. So if you pull out wax paper, you'll feel that there are two sides to it, and one side is extra kind of slick and waxy, and that's a good side for mixing up your paint on. As much as you can see it here, I've got my little tray that I've got attached to my easel, and I have just a piece of wax paper over the top of that, and this becomes my mixing palette. The nice thing about this is when I use it all up, then I can just crinkle it up and throw it away. And it's a really cheap way of mixing paint. You also will need a painting surface. I'll talk more about the different kinds of painting surfaces, but actually my preferred painting surface right now is a primed piece of paper. And again, I'll talk about what it means to prime paper and how you would use paper if you're going to do acrylic paint on it. Mixing on wax paper is great, but if you are wanting to keep your paint wet and workable for a few days, then you're going to need a covered palette. A little old yogurt container would actually work just fine. So what you would do is you would put your paint on the in the lid, right? You'd put your little dollops of paint in the lid of this yogurt container, and then this becomes your little water tub to rinse off your paintbrushes. After you're done, you dump out the water from the water tub, and then you put that over the top. The nice thing about that is that the moisture inside of the tub will actually help keep your paints wet and workable for a few days. So super cheap little yogurt container. Obviously you wouldn't want to turn it upside down, or turn it right side up rather. You'd want to keep it upside down in order to keep your paints in that condition. And then as you need them, you would just take your paints from the palette or from your covered palette and be able to mix them on your painting, your mixing surface. If you're in the classroom, you are going to have access to these covered palettes. A lot of them are going to look really, really messy, but acrylic paint when it dries is just plastic, so you can actually peel the paint right off of the palette. The other nice thing about acrylic is that once it's dry, it doesn't mix anymore, so even if you still have some remnants of acrylic paint left on your palette, if it's fully dry, it will not get into your fresh paint. You're going to need a water tub, and the water tub is, you'll fill it up about halfway. You're actually going to wash your brushes off less than you think in this water tub, but when you're using multiple brushes and you might be painting for a longer period of time, it is important to have a place to rinse brushes and also to keep your brushes wet so that the acrylic paint doesn't dry hard in the bristles. You also need a piece of scratch paper. As you can see, the scratch paper has been used many, many, many times, but this is where you're going to wipe off your brush after you've got paint on it, and that helps you reduce the amount of paint that you will be putting into your water tub and then ultimately down the drain. We don't want to pour this down the drain in its solid forms because it'll clog up the drains, and we also want to reduce the amount of chemicals we're putting into the water system. So use a piece of scratch paper, use it and abuse it until it's absolutely covered. Obviously, I've used this for a really long time, and I can continue to use it because I'm simply wiping off the excess paint.